This Hangout on Air is live. Week 5 of the NFL is live. This is Sigmund Bloom, footballguys.com. You may see down there in the corner Dr. Gene Bramall, because to make sure that you have the drop on everybody for injury news, and Matt Waldman bringing you, of course, all of the wisdom as we look at the Week 5 matchups, looking ahead here. And, we've reached cruising altitude now, and we also have evolving or devolving, as it may be, Gene, injury situations. I guess we have to start at the top, really at the top, because if you're talking about the top of fantasy football, it's Le'Veon Bell, it's Rob Gronkowski, and it's Julio Jones. Gene, we got a lot to talk about with Julio Jones. You can start with the Week 5 outlook, but obviously this is bigger than Week 5.
Yeah, I'm kicking myself a little bit on this one because a couple of weeks ago when you saw Julio Jones limp around and still play well, you could tell that he wasn't himself and you could tell that he was at risk. But I allowed myself, and we talked about this, I can't remember which podcast it was. I don't think it was on the Live Thursday show, but I brought it up a couple of times a couple of weeks ago saying we're going to get to this point with Julio at some point in the next 4 to 6 weeks where he's going to have to rest because you can tell he's not right and he's just good enough. And the routes he runs allow him to get separation despite the fact that he's not himself. And I was lulled into a false sense of security this week when the lead last week allowed. I didn't see the decreased snap count last week as a bad thing. I thought that was good. I thought the fact that they got ahead and were allowed to rest him, and then he practiced on Wednesday, which he's not been doing at all really this year. So I felt like, well, this isn't the week where we have to bring it up and talk about it. But as we know, and we talk about all the time, the Atlanta Falcons are probably the least or the most underreported team in the league. And I think Vaughn McClure's been doing a little bit better since he's been to ESPN, but we just don't hear about these things until Sunday morning. It was this way with the hip last year. It was this way with previous injuries with Julio and Roddy White and so many other situations. So we're left to rely on what happened the week before and what practice looks like, and that looked like everything was okay. And it's no surprise that a midweek incident was not reported until today. So, and I think it's meaningful. Just looking at the Vegas props this morning, somebody sent me a note. Steve Buzzard did and said Bovada still has Julio Jones at over under 7.5 receptions and 100 yards receiving, which gives you pause a little bit. But I think, there was a good point made this morning that the Falcons play on Thursday night, another divisional game against the Saints, a game that, yes, they're 4-0, but they would like to win and distance themselves from the rest of the pack. And we've seen him, Julio Jones, be limited, and we know that there's an issue this week with both Schefter and Glazer reporting it. So it really stands to reason that we're going to see his targets and probably snaps decreased today, particularly if they get ahead of the Cowboys, which the expectation, well, that was Cowboys a couple weeks ago. Who do they have today?
Washington.
Washington.
The
Yeah.
other side of the Cowboys.
Equally
Yeah.
an issue. The only and I think what the props are telling you is that this, and we've known this all week, the matchup against these cornerbacks are so bad. And Washington, if anything, they'll be able to stop the run today. So, but I think this is a spot where, we've said it with Calvin Johnson, we've said it with Jimmy Graham, we've said it with Julio in the past, that it's a high leverage situation. He's probably going to be used around the red zone. He's probably going to be used on critical third downs. But last week's 6 to 7 targets may be as good as it gets, so there's a much lower floor. The ceiling is still close to being there, not what it was with the Washington secondary earlier in the week. But I don't know. It makes me nervous. You could see this coming. I didn't expect it to be this week, but I think there's a very good argument to not come off of Julio in your season-long lineups, but because I just doubt that you can't. There's not going to be anybody else on your roster that makes more sense to put ahead of him. But just know that today's going to be rough. It's going to be one of those Jimmy Graham 2013, 2014 weeks where it's either 3 to 4 catches for 2 touchdowns or it's a bunch of nothing.
And what messes with us with Julio, and look, keeping it simple from a fantasy perspective, Julio is one of those, if he's active, he's in your lineup guys. I mean, unless we have affirmative knowledge that he's only going to play a certain number of plays. But like Gene said, he could even catch, we've seen Jimmy Graham do it. What's especially messing with us is we remember in garbage time when they almost came back to make that game against Green Bay a game, when he had 11 for 259 and 1 and was hobbling around, he was racking up fantasy points while it was clear that he was hurt, and then he missed the next week. So we talk about players who don't heal quickly or players who don't play well through injuries, and Julio Jones is one of those guys that he can kind of be out there on one leg and still rack up numbers.
He already
Uh,
has been. You know, if you
yeah,
saw some of those underneath
right,
crossing routes, he was running away from Cowboys defenders when it looked like he could barely run. So
right.
it's
But
a really tough situation. There's something going on here, but I'm with you. I don't know how you take him out of a
you
season-long
can't
lineup. Yeah.
tonight. I mean today. Now, but Matt, again, Easter egg Matt Waldman content at Football Guys, Atlanta Falcons recaps. You're watching this team closely. If who picks up the slack here? And there's a side story here, Matt, where Roddy White may be unhappy, maybe not. Teams are interested in trading for him, and we saw Andre Johnson on Thursday night. Now, look, Andre Johnson put up numbers, but he still looked like the game is. It's sad, but he's in that November December part of his career. What about Roddy White? If it's either he's forced into a bigger role with the Falcons, and there was some talk that teams might want to trade for him. I don't know if the Falcons will want that if this with this looming over them. But either way, we're looking at Roddy White potentially having more opportunity based on what you've seen from him. Is this an opportunity to get someone like a pennies on the dollar, or are we looking to Hankerson and Devontae Freeman to pick up even more of the slack?
I think that you have to look at what they do with Julio Jones and the wide receivers to answer that question more than it is about the talent of the players. In this case, you have to combine both, but the starting point is the scheme, because in Dirk Cutter's scheme in the previous years, they ran far more hard-breaking routes, perimeter routes that were kind of timing-based, that required a more athletic type of player that Roddy White once was. Now we're looking at a scheme where there's a lot of deeper crossing routes. There's a lot more play action where they're using delayed type of crosses or work in the middle of the field based off quick throws that are against zones, or where a crossing route allows a slower player to get free without having to do much in terms of stop, start, hard changes of direction. And that does favor wide receivers who are no longer as athletically superior as, say, Julio Jones is when he's healthy. So that can help Roddy White if they need to put him into that type of a role. Now, is he going to turn those 12-yard catches into 50-yard touchdowns? Absolutely not. So you're looking at more move the chains type of drives, a higher reception count for White with probably not as many yards and not touchdowns that go with it. Or they put Leonard Hankerson into that role, and then you have a player who isn't quite as fast as Jones but can still break some longer plays than probably what White can at this point, but he's going to drop more passes. He's just not a reliable catcher of the football enough to count on him the way that you can with Julio Jones. So my bet is that Leonard Hankerson gets that first shot, and that then it's Roddy White who's doing these delayed routes, who's doing these shallow crosses over the middle, and then doing these sneaky little plays from the slot where he and Matt Ryan are going to be in simpatico, and that's what they're going to do. So I don't necessarily I think what you're going to see is a higher reception count, a lower yards per attempt for Matt Ryan, and lower scoring if those guys can't hold on to the ball or can't break free, and I don't anticipate either of them would. So you may see more you may see more completions, more receptions, maybe more yards with fewer points. And so there's going to be lower upside for those receivers in fantasy leagues, maybe slightly lower in PPR.
Right.
But at the same time, then you're going to look at Leonard Hankerson, and then Roddy White does become probably a what the heck flex type of player.
And really briefly, just to punctuate this for folks, because you've watched Hankerson closely, and he's been after some buzz, and we have the reunion with Kyle Shanahan. He was a bit of a journeyman for a little bit there. Are his numbers legit? I mean, are his numbers, when you just looked at his numbers, is there play on the field to match with Hankerson? Is his game coming into focus?
No. His game is it is coming into focus. It's the game that it's always been. It's the reason why he's never become a full-time starter. I think that his game is propped up by the scheme and by knowledge of the scheme and Matt Ryan's excellent skill at being able to implement that scheme on the field in a way that Robert Griffin nor Kirk Cousins or any of the other Washington quarterbacks have been able to.
and of course there's Devontae Freeman, and we don't have to tell you he's legit. And Tevin Coleman might be back this week, but Devontae Freeman might catch 8 or 10 or 11 passes instead of 4 or 5 now, because he's that central to the offense. Gene, you warn us about the second injury, and in your typical excellent bedside manner, sometimes in your excellent ability to calm us, we don't necessarily let our hearts get gripped by the fear that, when Alshon Jeffrey has a second injury, it's not just going to be 1 week or 2 weeks. Now it's 4 weeks. When are we going to get out of this holding pattern?
Yeah, I don't know if we will. I think we're there a little bit. I did not like at all the fact that he did not practice on Friday. It's been 3 weeks where he's been limited in practice now, pretty much Wednesday through Friday, and we're happy when players have multiple weeks of reconditioning after they've had injuries. But each week we hear he's a little bit closer returning, a little bit closer returning. This week I think we heard more of that even than last week, and last week there was an expectation that he might be able to play. So the fact that we go Wednesday and Thursday and then don't practice at all on Friday, get ruled out as early as any other week, he's been ruled out, knowing that you're not going to hear anything from Chicago from John Fox, makes you worried. That I think the question is just as much, will he return next week versus are we looking at another 2 to 3 week setback here? And I think next Wednesday is going to tell us the tale. If he's not practicing on Wednesday, then we got a big problem. If he's back to a limited practice, then we're kind of still in that holding pattern, and we'll have to see how Thursday and Friday goes. But Wednesday is critical at this point. I think there's every bit as much chance that we've had some sort of aggravation and a setback, more than they just decided, we're not going to go this week anyway. Let's just save you from practice on Friday and come back strong next week. That could be the case, but given what we've seen so far over the last, 8 weeks since the calf injury, even more than that, I wouldn't count on that.
And they have a week 7 bye. So it just,
yes.
there's no, and the Bears aren't going anywhere this year. There's no reason for them to push him back on the field in week 6 unless he's saying, I got this. It's like I'm good as new. And what are the chances of that? Really quick, Gene, what about Eddie Royal today?
Yeah, that was another one. I jinxed myself last night when I said I think this is a pretty straightforward week. We've got Julio Jones and Julius Thomas is a little bit of concern. I probably should have put Eddie Royal on that list. I don't know if he plays today. It's an ankle. What he's been on the injury report in the past for has been hip. So the ankle's a little bit new. He didn't practice at all this week. Again, we're not going to hear anything from Chicago. This could be a big Wilson and certainly another big Bennett week. I think Royal is probably a little bit more questionable than even it's listed on the injury report.
So you hit it about Wilson and Black Unicorn. Martellus Bennett coming off of a big week, and Kansas City's pass defense has not been all that impressive. So on one hand, we get into these situations, Matt, and on one hand we say, well, Marcus Wilson, Eddie Royal playing limited or out. We saw Marcus Wilson last week look very good, and Marcus Wilson always been an RSP favorite, of course. We have a little bit of a showdown with Mike Leach. That's all behind him now. And even last year, big opportunity, didn't really seize the opportunity last year, Matt. But this year, especially in the game last week, on crucial drives and crucial moments, he had one bad drop and then seemed to come back even more confident and ready to rise to the occasion. And he did make some key plays for Jay Cutler. And what I noticed was that lanky frame, because he's like a 6'3", 190, 195 kind of guy. He looks like he's got a lot more functional strength than I saw back in the day at Washington State. Some of the things you're looking for in a number one receiver, in the sense that you're asking him to shoulder that load now, maybe against Marcus Peters today. But on the other hand, sometimes we fall in the trap here and we say more targets, and when a player's pushed into a more central role, he doesn't rise to the occasion. A lot of people looking at their DFS lineups and saying, Marcus Wilson. What does Matt Waldman say?
I'm all the way on that one. I've been going with him a fair bit in some of my DFS lineups, as well as in some of my season-long lineups where I have bye weeks. And I think you're right. And the explanation behind that to me is this. Marcus Wilson came out much earlier than he ever planned to come out for the NFL.
Yeah. I quit. What? I'm entering the draft.
Yeah. It's kind of like the 16-year-old who decides he's going to enter the military because he has no other choice, basically at this point. So he had to first was working on really getting his body right, getting into the situation. I mean, this wasn't a guy who probably had the whole year-long strategy of how I'm going to get my body ready for the NFL draft. He just basically, well, I'm kicked off the team. Now I'm here. Let's see what happens. And Mark Trestman had enough vision to understand that this guy's a good wide receiver, and if I'm able to stay on this team, we can build him out. And this, the second year, the first year to the second year was really about following around Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey and getting built up. And then they got him a little playing time, and he's like, "Whoa, the NFL, we're not in Washington State anymore." And I think this year is something that reflects the excitement that Jay Cutler has had about him from what he's seen in practice for the past couple of years. And he does. He's doing the same things I've seen at Washington State when he looks good. And that should tell you a lot about a player's development. When he looks like himself on an NFL field, that's a good sign. And like you said, he's making nice extensions for the football. He shows that little bit of burst that he always had. He's always been good at adjusting to the ball with his back to the quarterback and in tight coverage. And you're seeing more and more of that. And I think that they may wind up with a player who can complement Alshon Jeffrey, and then that makes Eddie Royal an even more devastating option if he can get over the ankle injury.
It should be an interesting game. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, even without Alshon Jeffrey and maybe without Eddie Royal. It's going to be very interesting. I know quarterback streamers were looking at Jay Cutler. Maybe we back off Jay Cutler and flip to Alex Smith. Do we actually go with Alex Smith? Both of these defenses pretty generous through the air. Another game, and we're going to drill down to some levels in this game, but we're going to start at the injury level. Another game that I think is maybe the most entertaining game of the day. Like, if you circle one game on your sheet and say, watch this game, it is Seattle going into Cincinnati. And here we are again, Gene, with that second injury with Marshawn Lynch. And as I've been saying, everybody knows our history with Marshawn Lynch on the show. I have feelings for Marshawn Lynch. I love Marshawn Lynch. I do not want to believe that this is that final act, or at least that final act for fantasy football, where we can never go back to believing in him as a cornerstone as our team. But I'm getting worried, Gene. I'm getting worried because, yeah, sure, Pete Carroll and his sunny optimism, and they're trying to tell us one thing, but man, the actual hard data we get says something completely different. Like, they're trying to say he's close, he's so close, and it actually seems like he's getting farther away from playing. What's going on, Gene?
I'm fine with all of this. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to say it. I don't think there's anything unusual going on here at all. I think we were led to believe that the calf injury wasn't a big deal and the back spasms weren't a big deal, and then the hamstring happened and they were kind of holding him out as a precaution. But, as we talked about with DeMarco Murray, and we've talked about LaShawn McCoy, if you're getting an MRI for a hamstring strain, or really any muscle strain, there's concern there. And no, the Seahawks didn't say right away that there was some damage to the tissue and that could have been a significant grade 1 or maybe even a mid-grade calf or hamstring strain. But that was always a possibility, because we know it was, even though it was an aggravation, it was not an aggravation of the calf issue. It still means that there's some sort of cascade effect there, and it put him at high risk. So, and those things are always 2 to 4 week injuries. And as we talked about on the Thursday night show, once a player elects to take a week off, it's that much easier for them to take 2, 3, 4 weeks off and let themselves fully heal, because they've already proven to themselves, the team, the training staff, everybody else, that this isn't something that I'm able to just play through. And a player like Marshawn Lynch, who has played through injuries in the past, is going to get the benefit of the doubt. This is totally different than Ryan Matthews not being able to get out of the training room, or somebody along those lines where there's been a little bit of concern. So this doesn't worry me all that much. I think the big concern with Marshawn Lynch is, some of it is definitely the injury, but it's the offensive line.
Yeah.
The reason I was okay with Lynch in the first couple of weeks is because he was getting 8 to 10 targets, and they hadn't found anybody to bring him off the field every third series, or Fred Jackson wasn't coming in and taking all of those third down snaps. So he was game flow and matchup independent. But the ceiling is not going to be there for Lynch, even at home, where he plays very well, until that offensive line cleans things up a little bit. And I've heard from lots of smart people that over time, even if you've got relatively weak parts, weak moving parts in that offensive line. Once they play together and figure themselves out, they can get better even if the personnel doesn't get better. So I think what you hope is Marshawn Lynch comes back as close to fully healthy as possible, and we don't have to worry about him aggravating the injury, and that the offensive line comes together in the meantime. And Seattle has had some rough matchups. They got another one today in Cincinnati. I think that's kind of an underrated spot for the Cincinnati defense. Hopefully all that comes together by the time Marshawn Lynch is healthy, and we're talking about 25 to 30 touches and over 100 total yards and multiple touchdowns again in good spots. But I think both of those things have to happen. It's not just the injury that should concern you. It should be the overall appearance of that offense as well, because they can get away with not playing well because how well their defense plays.
So what I'm getting from you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like from your tone, like, hey, Seattle has a week 9 bye. Like they're not going to need to keep Lynch out until week 9. Like we're going to see Lynch on the field in the next week or two. You think? I mean, just based on what you can divin from what you've looked at.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is I agree with you. I think that I don't think there's any funny business coming out.
They're not hiding from us
Seattle
that he's
right
in a lot worse shape than they're putting on. Yeah.
It could be a 4-week injury, yes, but I think when they say he's gradually getting closer, that's the case. I think that's the case. I don't think this is a 6 to 8 week deal. I don't think he's got something torn. I don't think he's out a long period of time. I'll be surprised if we don't see him before the bye. But again, he's got to go through that reconditioning period, and he's already had calf, back, and hamstring stuff, and all that goes together. So as he's finishing the rehab on his hamstring, his back could act up on him again. Lots of other things. So I'm not worried that it's month to month. I think it's a week to week thing, and we'll readdress it next week.
So we have a lot of things to untangle here, but first and foremost, Matt, I've got to ask you what's intriguing to me. Well, actually, let's take the immediate fantasy implications. Thomas Rawls, and it does look like, and Gene, really quickly, Fred Jackson can play, right?
Yes, but it's a high ankle sprain, so they're going to try. It's not a thing that can be braced up easily. I think it's going to be mostly Thomas Rawls, and if Jackson gets tackled funny or anything else, yes, exactly.
And Rod Smith. So you and Matt, you give us any intel from the RSP on Rod Smith, but Thomas Rawls, who we talked about, and we saw with Thomas Rawls last week on Monday night. I think 8 carries for 9 yards in the first half. He's not an elusive back in the backfield. He's a back that if there's a crease or a hole, he's going to hit it hard. He's going to hit it violently with everything he's got. And then we saw in the second half, he looked more like the Thomas Rawls we expected. As a fantasy option today, though, with Lynch out at Cincinnati, this isn't Seattle at home. This is Seattle at Cincinnati. Very good defense. As Gene said, very good front seven. A team that can grab a game script and pull it the way they want to, make Seattle play from behind in this game, maybe. Is Rawls advisable to play today, Matt?
I wish I was playing Cecil and Fessel, who has Thomas Rawls, and I was hoping that Cecil would start him. So that's how much I have little confidence in Thomas Rawls this week. And I agree with you about what Rawls has to offer. He's a guy that when he gets into the hole, he has really good vision, and he will make some interesting cuts. And when I say interesting, they can be exciting, and you go, wow, I can't believe you saw that, and you were able to even make that cut. But
Ray Graham, I remember Ray Graham, like a power cutter, like a guy that has some interesting lateral ability to change lanes, but is always doing it with power.
Yes. The problem is that Ray Graham usually cut into an open area. Thomas Rawls doesn't always do that. So that's the thing why I said interesting as opposed to good. It was mixed results with him. So yeah, I mean, he's a guy that if they're open in creases, if it clicks today like earlier than scheduled, and I agree with Gene's points about the offensive line, I mean, yeah, then I think that Thomas Rawls could be a nice option, but he's to me, he's a prohibitive. He's not a player that I really want to start in any situation unless I'm truly desperate. And Rod Smith is a big, quick guy who can catch the football and run over you, and he has the agility to run around you. This is a very talented running back who just got into trouble way too often in Urban Meyer's system in Ohio State. And just as he was starting to turn it around and they were getting excited about him and even using him a little bit on the field, he got popped again for using marijuana, and basically his career was over at that point. And I think Seattle, they are always very good at being able to scout. I think they're very good at scouting certain skill positions, and they're also easy enough at identifying players who may have had issues, but those issues aren't maybe from a societal standpoint where our society looks to be heading aren't unbelievably major issues, and they wanted to give him a chance because of his size, power. I mean, he can get a little wild and try and bounce things where he shouldn't bounce it because he's too reliant on his athleticism. But this is a back that I was not surprised at all that a team drafted him, and signed him off of as an undrafted free agent, and he's a guy to keep an eye on because Rawls will start. If he's ineffective, they might give him some carries, but to be honest with you, he's not anybody you want to put into a lineup right now. He's just a guy you want to monitor, and if you have room on a dynasty roster or a season-long roster and there's nobody available on the waiver wire, he's that kind of lottery ticket you pick up now before he becomes in demand in free agency. If Rawls goes down and suddenly we're looking at Rod Smith with 120 yards and 2 touchdowns behind a moribund offensive line.
And as we talk about every year, 0 with string running backs, not even third string running backs, 0 with string running backs matter by the end of the season. And what I love about getting the RSP intel is it is not trivial to say, okay, was this guy undrafted because he's lacking something that puts him right at that threshold where a team was like, well, sure, maybe he can contribute, like George Wynn. There's a lot of good things about his game, but let's be fair about who this guy really is. Or was he a guy who fell out of the draft because of other things? Like Marcus Wilson ended up falling to the 7th round. But it's important to be able to tease apart how much of a player's draft stock is about their skills, abilities, tools, and how much of it is about other things. If it's about other things, then that UDFA label can get us off track when we're deciding, well, how much of an impact could this player really have? Now I'm much more fascinated with this game on the preview level, and I'll start with Eugene, because this is that fork in the road for Andy Dalton. I think a lot of us are very wary about, well, hey, Andy Dalton starts strong, Andy Dalton's matchups have been good, Andy Dalton's skill players have been playing well, and he's that kind of player that when it's rolling, we've seen it over the years, when it's rolling, when their game plan's working, when they're executing, he looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But if he has to start going upstream against some adversity, we see fold up shop. We see everybody get discouraged, including him. And this is, I think, because it's Seattle away from Seattle, but Gene, because it's Seattle, this could be a game that, hey, if Andy Dalton looks the same today as he has in the first month of the season, then you start to open your mind and maybe this is a different Andy Dalton. Do you think we're going to see a different Andy Dalton, or are we going to see the same old Andy Dalton against tough matchups today against Seattle?
At some point, your colors do not change. It's rare for people to mature after a certain age. It's rare for football players to change who they are after a certain amount of time in the league. And Andy Dalton has been around long enough. We know what his arm is like. We know what his pocket presence is like. We know what his decision-making is like. I don't think that, yes, and I think if we would go back and look at every pass he's thrown over the past 3 or 4 weeks, there were a lot of missed passes in there. Some of them were on the wide receivers. Marvin Jones had a big drop last week. AJ Green has struggled with drops a little bit off and on. But there's been the same inaccuracy, the same questionable decision making. There's been less of it, but it's still there. And I think this is a week where even in Cincinnati, you're probably going to see Dalton have to move the ball through the air. And the nice thing about that is all his weapons are healthy, which will help him some. But he's still got to deliver the ball on time in the right spot. And I think that Jeremy Hill looked a little bit better last week. Gio Bernard's been looking okay, but I think Seattle can successfully defend the run today, which is going to put this on Andy Dalton. And no, it's not a primetime game, but they will find ways to get pressure on him or disguise coverages, and we'll see what his decision-making looks like today. But I think your point is the important one. If he makes good decisions today and plays well today, then I think we can trust him a little bit more moving forward.
So, Matt, I'll ask you, because Legion of Boom and all that stuff, but hey, okay, so you made Jimmy Clausen look bad. Congratulations. Matthew Stafford looked bad for most of the game, but I think that's as much Joe Lombardi as Matthew Stafford. When at the end of the game, when Matthew Stafford had to just rub 2 sticks together and do it himself, he drove them right down the field. Matt, are we overestimating Seattle, and does that fit in to underestimating Dalton, underestimating Cincinnati's offense. Maybe there's a placebo effect here where now that Dalton has all hands on deck and things have been working well, that he doesn't let himself fall into the shame spiral of those bad decisions he's made in the past. What's going to go down today in Cincinnati when the Cincinnati offense, pass offense in particular, is facing the Seattle defense?
Well, I think we probably should just take a look at Green Bay's offense and how they performed against Seattle is probably a good measuring stick for the time being, and just reverse kind of the roles in that situation. Where as you know, the wide receivers are very good but not great, or pretty good but not great, but the quarterback is unbelievably great. And then in Cincinnati, what you're really looking at is a team where the quarterback's pretty good, but the receivers are the ones that are really going to challenge this defense. And if we look at what happened, Aaron Rodgers threw for 189 yards and a touchdown and an interception. So they shut him down pretty well. Now, again, he didn't have Jordy Nelson. Randall Cobb was still banged up a fair bit. Devontae Adams was, Devontae Adams, and James Jones was probably the only guy that was really doing some great work there. But Andy Dalton doesn't have that mobility that's going to keep him alive in the same way that you're going to see from a player like Aaron Rodgers. But A.J. Green can challenge anybody. So this is one of those matchups where I look at A.J. Green, Richard Sherman, and I think the edge is actually on A.J. Green, not Richard Sherman. And I think that that's something that people are going to automatically just go, oh, well, A.J. Green's not going to have a good game because he's drawing Richard Sherman. And I think that where Richard Sherman handles the big guys well because he can play physical and the big guys who can kind of motor downfield and build up speed. Julio Jones, for instance, is a guy that I don't know if he's always handled him well, but he's a little better with the bigger guys than he is the guys who are really finesse, quick, stop, start, and can tell you a story. And they've got two receivers who can tell a story all day long when it comes to that. And I think that we're going to see this defense get tested for the first time this year in a major way, and I wouldn't be surprised if Cincinnati wins this game or Cincinnati at least scores somewhere between 20 to 28 points, and we see Seattle actually have to throw the ball. And that's where I think this week people will look at it and go, see, Seattle's not really all that good. That whole they're back isn't there. And then 4 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, when Marshawn Lynch gets healthy and I make Chase Stewart cry in our next vessel matchup again with a healthy Marshawn Lynch, then then they'll be going, oh yeah, maybe we wrote them off a little too soon in week 5.
Just like last year. And this is, I'm the last person to figure things out, the oncoming train and the light in the tunnel. I think Andy Dalton's going to do all right today. And I think the name that we haven't mentioned yet is Hugh Jackson. And it's just a question of Hugh Jackson being like the spirit guide for him in the back of his head and being that upbeat, positive, optimistic guy, because saying, like, you got this, Andy. You got this, because they can basically be like, Indy's offense or New Orleans offense was really good, or New England's offense where it's like, okay, fine. Sherman's got Green covered. Maybe you've got something on Marvin Jones. Maybe you've got Cam Chancellor on Tyler Eifert. You still have Giovanni Bernard leaking out of the backfield. And the other thing that's happening is, Brandon Tate caught the long touchdown last week. Mohamed Sanu's made some big plays. Like, if Andy Dalton has been equipped with the kind of play designs and progressions and understanding of his offense, because Seattle's not getting a lot of pressure. Still, they're not a big pressure defense. So if he's able to calmly understand the way the deck is stacked for him, Seattle, no defense can match up with everything they put out there on the field. I think he can make this work. And then, like you said, you're going to have Seattle. I actually like Russell Wilson in DFS today a lot. I think Russell Wilson's got to put the whole offense on his back, and that equals sometimes massive. I see this game. Didn't Green Bay and Cincinnati play a game a year or two ago that was like 33-30 or something, just a wild and woolly, all kinds of things happening, big numbers on offense? Because I think what we see when we watch games every week is that games have a life of their own, and a few things early can set a game off on a game script where both teams become really loose, really aggressive, taking a lot of chances, opportunistic. I think this is going to be an extremely entertaining game. You brought up the Green. Go ahead.
Just so you have an idea about what I mentioned about AJ Green, I'm just looking at past opponents, and here's some players, quick, smooth route runners who tell a story. Deshaun Jackson, 5 for 157 and a touchdown. Then we're looking at Odell Beckham, 7 for 108. Then let's see, who was the other player that's on here that we had? Let's see, we had Emmanuel Sanders, 11 for 149.
Yeah.
Those are three players that they're not as tall as AJ Green, but they're just as quick, and they're very good at being able to get downfield. So I would say if you're looking for a good matchup with a major receiver against a major corner, I think AJ Green, based on those prototypes, has a pretty good advantage there.
We're always trying to go, a bit if we can in these tournament plays against the stream here. You brought up Green Bay, Matt. So, Gene, let's really quickly touch on Randall Cobb and James Jones this week, because and the Randall Cobb thing reminds me of situations in the past where, yes, players have played and we said you can start him, he's okay, he's going to play, but then we look back over a course of a few weeks and say, well, he's underperforming, and then it's like, well, of course he's underperforming. He came in with a shoulder injury, he aggravated the shoulder injury. Yes, he can still play with it. It's a range of motion pain tolerance issue, but that doesn't mean he's going to be the same guy. Are we back there again, or we at least should we be on alert that we're back there again with Randall Cobb?
I think we should be, just because last week he looked like he took a hit that was a little bit more aggravating than the week before, and that's sort of what we're going to get with this for a period of time until he, maybe through the bye week things settle down and heal enough to where he won't have a problem. But as we've seen, it hasn't limited him too much. Last week wasn't a great situation, but the week before that he did just fine. The way he's being used is different than the way James Jones is being used, and I think the type of routes he's running, the type of targets he's having, means that he's going to get enough to trust him. Now, he may not be the elite option that Jordy Nelson or that Randall Cobb was before injury, because of the number of targets that he's going to get from Aaron Rodgers. And today may set up as more of a running game than more of a passing game because Cobb is dinged and James Jones has a hamstring, and everybody else struggling in that passing offense with injuries possibly. So Devontae Adams still being out. But I'm not too concerned about Cobb. I think the ceiling is down a little bit, but I think there's still enough volume there that he should be okay.
Well, then what about James Jones, who's actually questionable where Cobb is probable?
Yeah, I think I'm not too worried about James Jones. I haven't heard anything. The Packers medical staff tends to be conservative. They let him practice all week. There hadn't seemed to be any concern from the media members, and there's lots of them up in Green Bay that can sniff things out. Yeah, I think there's, just like with any injury, if you're not fully practicing, it's enough where there might be an aggravation during the game. But that's why I'm saying I wonder if this is a Lacy week more than a Rodgers week, which is rough because it's a home game and Rodgers usually, and they're not afraid to throw the ball in the red zone. But I think there's just enough with these guys to where Aaron Rodgers is good enough to make somebody that's running at 90% still look fine. But my gut today tells me that this is more of a Lacy week than a passing week.
You said gut and Lacy.
Good.
Matt, and I agree with where Gene led us to there. This is a Lacy day. On a larger sense, from the preview point of view, St. Louis has been one of the 5 or 6 best teams in the league when they face NFC West teams. When they're not facing NFC West teams, well, they look like a team that's perennially picking in the top half of the first round and has a lot of holes to fill. Is this game going to follow that pattern? Is Aaron Rodgers, Lambeau Field, the Magic, and so on going to? Because what we saw in Week 1 was St. Louis played Seattle straight up and showed a lot of things. Nick Foles showed a lot of things. The defense showed a lot of things, and then they go out to Washington, and Washington basically just mops it up with them. Washington's looking better than we expected. So I'm not really trashing Washington, but Green Bay's not Washington. Todd Gurley. A lot of people are going, "Hey, I'm psyched." Todd Gurley. Is this a reminder that as good as Todd Gurley is, he's still on the Rams and they're still going to play games like this? Or did things really change? Tavon Austin, did things really change last week?
I'm still not completely sold, though I like what St. Louis did last week. And the reason I'm not completely sold is is again that you're looking at a defense that seems to give up more against the run than what you would expect from that fearsome front four that they have. So I'm not all there. They also tend to be a mistake-ridden team that takes a lot of chances and gets over-aggressive in its secondary. So I'm not exactly, I think that this is a type of game where Aaron Rodgers, even with his banged-up weaponry, I was kind of waiting to hear what Gene had to say about the receivers because I've been kind of cautious about them this week. But it sounds to me that if Gene feels a little more optimistic about what's available there, that this is a game that could get out of hand fairly quickly, and if it does, then Todd Gurley will get his. I just don't think it's a Todd Gurley has another huge day 2 weeks in a row. I think it's more of he had a good day, and I feel okay with what I picked, but he didn't turn out to be the awesome player. Now, the argument in favor of that, Gurley's talented enough to have a big day, but let's look at the past 3 weeks, or past few weeks. You have Matt Forte, who had a huge game against them, 24, 141 and a touchdown. Marshawn Lynch, who wasn't completely healthy, and that offensive line wasn't very good, 15 for 41. And then the Kansas City Chiefs, whose offense was asleep at the wheel for about 3.5 quarters, and then finally somebody came downstairs and said to Andy Reid and Alex Smith, "There's this guy we signed for a lot of money who's a pretty good receiver. Maybe you need to start using him as such before you lose your jobs." And for the past 2-3 weeks, Jeremy Maclin has been unbelievably productive. And Jamal Charles had 2 of his 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. So, and he still, he had a decent day, but they were behind, so they couldn't really run him. So to me, it's about staying in the game early on. If they can do that on grass against the Packers, then we're looking to be in fairly good shape. And I do think that a team that is able to run the ball and strike fear in the hearts of defenses with the run gains a lot more confidence. So to me, this is a game that could be close, but they need to stay in the game the first quarter and a half. If they give up a 2-3 touchdown lead in the first quarter and a half, this game is over, and this team doesn't have that confidence that they rode in on with. And so I like Gurley, but I don't love him this week.
And it's what we're going to learn a lot more about is St. Louis as a team.
Yes.
And that's going to hook up to our expectations of Gurley going forward. Got like 15 minutes. I'm going to try to touch on, jump around some topics, kind of quick hitter style here. And offensive line, we brought up, and this is something to keep in the back of our mind because a lot of the players and units that we're disappointed with, offensive line is one of the reasons. And then we're also getting into the adjustment part of the season, whether it be bye week adjustments or teams and they're sometimes announcing to us, like, we're going to get this player more involved and things like that. Coming out of the bye, Gene, Tennessee, and Marcus Mariota against Buffalo. Now, we would have looked at this, and I think I actually said this on a show like a couple of months ago, looking at their schedule, that game with Buffalo, well, that's where we're really going to learn a lot about Marcus Mariota. But, hey, Buffalo's given up 10 passing touchdowns in 4 games already. So from a fantasy point of view, you shouldn't necessarily be scared away. What about just from a football point of view? What do you expect to see? Do we think that Ken Wisenhunt and Jason Michael, I mean, they're doing things right, Gene. Are they going to do some things right against Buffalo?
It's a home game. I know I'm kind of today. I don't know. Buffalo gets Aaron Williams back this week. That's important. But I generally like young quarterbacks coming out of a bye week. Just they get a chance to settle down, reevaluate how things have gone through the early season. Not that teams out of the bye week routinely do well, but I think it's generally a good spot. But what we said last week about Jameis Winston and Mike Evans, going to get some answered questions about them, and Josh Norman. I think we get some of those questions answered about the Buffalo defense today, what sort of adjustments they've been able to make, how they're going to attack that Tennessee offensive line, whether or not Aaron Williams makes a big difference for guys like Ronald Darby, and if Stephon Gilmore's a little bit healthier than he's been. I think we get those questions answered today. I like the Buffalo defense more than Mariota here this week, simply because I don't see Tennessee being able to run the ball at all. I think that the secondary matches up better against the Tennessee wideouts than what we've seen in the past, and that pass rush is still there. It's coming from Mario Williams. It's coming from Jerry Hughes. You've got Darius and Williams there. I'll be very happy to see Mariota play well today. Put it that way.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting is last week Eli Manning and the Giants really got out early on Buffalo with a quick passing game, and then the second half Buffalo adjusted. So did they come out assuming that, jumping the routes, jumping those rhythm passes that Mariota's thrown so well to guys like Kendall Wright this year, and then of course this is the beautiful back and forth of football that keeps us coming back. Wisenhunt and Michael anticipate that in the bye. They're going to be jumping that stuff and maybe use some of that rhythm to throw them off because Rex Ryan teams are going to be over-aggressive teams always, emotionally, and just the way they play the game. Matt, feel free to chime in on what you see in this Mariota against Buffalo matchup. But the next one I want to move on to in terms of adjustments is Philadelphia. And where do you even start? It's the offensive line. It's Sam Bradford. It's the running game. And they're playing New Orleans, which should be a defense that is a tonic. It should help a panacea, heal some stuff up. Do we see Philly's offense start to look like what we expected today against the Saints?
Before we do that, I do want to comment on that Tennessee-Buffalo game. I would strongly suggest to people that if you have an opportunity to buy low on Dorial Green-Beckham, I would do so right about now and not expect anything for the next 2 to 4 weeks. But I do believe, there's reports that he's going to get more involved in the offense, and we've already seen what he can do. And I think Stephon Gilmore is quite vulnerable in the red zone against players who can just adjust to the ball well. He always has been. I remember a little-known player I liked who was out of East Carolina, who played for Washington for a little bit, who never made it really in the NFL, who dominated Stephon Gilmore at South Carolina. And I continue to see it every few weeks where Gilmore just gets whooped by somebody on a fade route in a way that you would say this is why he's not a top corner in the league just yet. So I would say Dorial Green-Beckham is a good one. And then what was the other matchup? Saints, Philadelphia.
Philly. Is the Philly offense going to get the engine to turn over?
I think they will this week. I think it's going to be a fun game to watch if you're into offense. But I'm not sure it's a lasting type of thing. And the thing about the Saints, that even the risk with the Saints is, even though they give up a lot, they're very aggressive and they're hard hitting, and it's a young team. And if they get going in the right way, you see some of these rookies. I would actually say that I think New Orleans' offense turns over before Philadelphia's offense turns over in this game. I think that Drew Brees is a good start today. I think that, and I honestly think that Philadelphia may look good enough because they have to try and keep up, but it's going to be a mistake-ridden game for them. And I think that some of these young Saints players are going to take it to Sam Bradford.
I do too. It's funny. Our great tip and pick, by the way, John Lee, and he's as definitive a voice on anything DFS as anybody I've ever encountered. And I have Sam Bradford still my stance on Sam Bradford, whether it's DFS daily fantasy or season-long fantasy, is when I will not put Sam Bradford in my lineup until I see him play a good game. And I don't think he really played a good game last week. He had the 3 deep balls. One was a lapse. One was against an injured player. Otherwise, it still looks like fits and starts, and the starts aren't really much of starts. And even though New Orleans' defense is bad, I would rather be counting on a player who's playing well continuing to play well than someone playing bad continuing to play bad, and then all the things that would set in motion. But we watch this one closely because the Philly is going to be okay narrative. If they don't look like things moving parts start to get in synchronicity today, then when is it going to happen? Let's talk about Baltimore-Cleveland, Matt, and specifically Kamar Aiken. And Kamar Aiken is a bit of an anonymous player, and I suppose I was guilty of this as anybody to say, well, look at who's going to be getting playing time for Baltimore at wide receiver, Kamar Aiken and Marlon Brown. And I know you've talked about Marlon Brown. But Kamar Aiken's basically their number one receiver today. Now, Joe Hayden is playing, but he is also banged up. Again, whether it's bye weeks, as you mentioned, now we're in the bye week gauntlet, DFS and so on, are we willing to give Kamar Aiken that trust?
No, but if you enough trust that if you're going to go PPR and you're going to rely on target based insertion into your lineup, then this is the guy that you're going to want to do that with. I know that Teron Davenport, who's a good friend of ours, who covers the Baltimore Ravens, is a former CFL wide receiver. Who's a guy that I really enjoy watching games with or practices with at the Senior Bowl, and we talk about wide receiver play and defensive back play a lot. He has always been fairly supportive of Aiken and feels like that is a good route runner, a guy who can get deep, need to be on certain set plays, and this is a team where that he might be able to get healthy, but Joe Hayden, Gene, he's healthy enough to play, right? The finger isn't going to be a thing that's going to keep him out.
No, I think that and some of the lower leg issues he had are a little bit of a problem, but he looks like he's going to go today.
Yeah, so to me, it might be a little bit of a push where Aiken gets a couple on Hayden, but I don't think it's going to be anything major. Where this team is going to have to win is with the run game and with the tight end play, I think, for them to really make a difference with some big plays. So Aiken, to me, might be a 6 to 8 catch guy for 70 to 80 yards. That's good enough for you to get some points, and may really like that as a flex play. But I wouldn't. But guys like Marcus Wilson who have more upside than that, I might be more inclined to go with with that Chicago wide receiver than I would with or even stick with a guy like Marvin Jones in Seattle, where it's going to be the Sherman on Green show, and Jones is still, Jones didn't have a big week last week, but he dropped a touchdown. I mean, it bounced off his chest last week, and you don't usually see him drop passes like that. And then they tried to get him involved a few times, and there were some plays called back. So a guy like Jones, to me, would probably be even more of an appealing play than Kamar Aiken.
Gene, I want to ask you about Derek Carr, Amari Cooper, Latavius Murray, about the Oakland offense facing by far the stiffest test. And let's be honest, probably the stiffest test most teams will have this year. If they have the Broncos on the schedule, that's going to be the test. Are we treating Denver as really you have to find a compelling reason to play anybody against them at this point? Or are you saying Oakland might show that they've got some counterpunches now? They can move the ball against good, great defenses.
Well, I feel marginally better about Oakland this week because they're at home. But even a home divisional game those games tend to be a little bit lower scoring. So I'd be a little bit worried about Carr for sure because he's going to take some hits today. I think the secondary plays pretty well against Amari Cooper, and Michael Crabtree being out is going to be an issue. I think they might try to get Latavius Murray established, but I think it's going to be a lower scoring game than people think. I don't think Peyton Manning is what he once was. It's hard to see either one of these teams getting more than 3 touchdowns, I think.
So wait, Crabtree's going to be out?
Isn't he out? Am I missing something?
Uh-oh. I didn't know.
Was it from last week? Hold on a second.
He had an ankle problem, I know, heading into this week. That was a concern.
Oh, no. Who was I thinking of? I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, that's good. No,
that was last week, so no, it was ankle.
I just want to. Yeah, he's.
No. I got him confused. I'm not even sure who I had him confused with in my head, but thank you for telling me that.
No problem. This is kind of like an even more cautious version of the Dalton referendum, where we're looking to learn where somebody's coming in with this much tougher data point. What I'm interested in, and Matt and I talked about this in one of our conversations, is the idea of, and you brought up Matt Marcel Reese, I brought up Roy Halou as players. These are the kinds of players that you chip away at a really tough defense with in their roles. Talk a little more about that, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to understand what Latavius Murray is, and I know that a lot of people are very much enamored with him as a running back because they see the size, they see the long speed, they see the flashes of being able to catch the football because they did try him out as a tight end at the University of Central Florida at one time. But he is one of those runners that I joked about it this way. He talks like Bloom and I talk, which is kind of like 5 directions at once and then finally like settles on a direction. And I probably do that worse than Bloom. So it's
not a compliment. The point is comparing it to us is not a compliment.
No, it's not. You should not run the way that we talk and try and process what we're saying. Right. And so sometimes he gets away with it though. I mean, it's one of those things where he confuses himself just enough that the defense is confused, and then he's got enough athleticism to actually win and win big, or if he's got a big hole. Now, he's obviously good enough to be an NFL contributor, and when you get him going, that herky-jerky kind of style that he has, that's a little bit more awkward than what you see from patient runners, even more patient runners like a Devonta Freeman. He can get you yards, but he's more of a boom bust type of play. And I think that we saw with Roy Halou what he does consistently out of the backfield, that he has some things to offer. And Marcel Reese, I mean, I think any Raiders fan will tell you that Marcel Reese, it's just a shock to them that this guy has not gotten the opportunities he should from the backfield. To me, this is a back that you look at and think, well, why don't they slim him down? He was a former wide receiver at Washington anyway. Why don't they let him, play at 215 to 225, 230 and see what he has, because the speed has always been there. So I don't quite get it why they looked at him and said, we have a wide receiver. We think we have a tight end or a fullback, So it's kind of odd there. So combining these guys and maybe using their talents in a way where you could take Halou and Murray, split them on either side, flanking Derek Carr in the shotgun in a number of sets where that you can control the middle of the field. They're kind of like two knights on the chessboard who you can kind of have come out and circle out and catch the balls against linebackers where they have a definite advantage, or that you can use them on wheel routes or run the ball with them and do a number of different things that fits better into their offense than Latavius Murray, who doesn't quite, what he does best doesn't integrate quite as well as what the passing game does well. And I think that if you were able to match your scheme to your personnel, Latavius Murray would be more the guy they bring in short right. Yardage situations, and the guys you'd use more often would be Halou and Marcel Reese, and in tandem, and it would be kind of more like a much less minor league version of Roger Craig and Tom Rathman, in an offense, and they use that West Coast style concepts. Might as well go that route.
And Derek Carr's wired for those concepts, and I think what I'm picturing, like you said, it's a three-way backfield's the new black, speaking of black and silver, and I love the idea of Derek Carr, like, with Reese and Halou, and like he's putting the ball in the belly of Halou, faking the read option, getting the defense to commit, because Denver's another over-aggressive defense under Wade Phillips. And meanwhile, like you said, like here's Reese sneaking out the other side on a wheel route, and he just puts it in his belly, pulls it back out. And then you have Reese, and we've seen, as you said, linebackers, this is a weakness that you can exploit against Denver, if there is one, is getting some running backs against linebackers out in space. It just makes sense.
Slow that rush.
Yeah.
Slow those two drag racing cars off each edge there, and put a banana in those tail pipes, and
Yeah, it's the best of, I think, of the three afternoon matchups. It's the one I think is really intriguing for being revealing, and we get to rational coaching, Gene, and I want to get into just a quick lightning round, a couple of things to touch on. I like try to touch on these a little bit on every game. Rational coaching, Gene, is Detroit's offensive coaching going to become rational at any point this year?
Gosh, I hope so. That's
what we're left with, hope.
It's painful to watch how they're using the offensive weapons they have. Calvin Johnson, Golden Tate, Amir Abdullah, even Eric Ebron before he was healthy, I think.
Yeah.
You could compare those favorably to a lot of different offenses around the league, and Stafford hasn't. I don't think he's necessarily been himself. And I listened to you and Evan talk this week, Evan Silva, about these issues and opening up the offense for him and allowing him to freelance a little bit and get comfortable, at least get into a rhythm. But I don't know.
They don't need Dr. Phil.
Yeah, they do. No, seriously.
This is going to be a changing moment.
Accept yourself. Really quickly, the best, true or false, Matt, the best big-ticket wide receiver this week, Odell Beckham.
True. I love it. I'm loving that, and I think it's just because San Francisco is a mess, and it seems like that this is an offense that's hitting on all cylinders.
Gene, pick the Tampa Bay wide receiver that will get 20 targets today.
20 targets?
Okay, 15. The point is, we've seen it. Pick the one Tampa receiver against Jacksonville that you want to play today.
You guys were on Mike Evans last week. I wasn't so sure. This week I have Mike Evans in lots and lots and lots.
We're flip-flopping. We're flip-flopping. Matt, start Antonio Gates with confidence?
No, but I take the chance.
Yeah, Pittsburgh and San Diego. so wonderful to get to share this journey with you all every week, and to get to share it with Matt and Gene every Sunday morning. This is a wonderful ritual. Thank you for joining us, for encouraging us, and we're going to be coming back at you 10 times a week on the Audible. We love it. We love you. We love you for giving us this opportunity, and hope you continue to do that. And we do it for you because you stay classy.